Welcome to the latest episode of Aspire Ed Talks, where we unravel the fascinating world of fertility and science. I'm Dr. Keshav Malhotra, your host, and today we're diving into a topic that's at the very heart of the IVF laboratory, which is growing the best embryos. Embryologists and clinicians face critical questions every day on how to cultivate the healthiest, most viable embryos, which give our patients the best chance of success. Now, in this episode, we'll explore the science, the skill, and the innovations behind growing the best embryos at the earliest stages. And we're thrilled to have Professor Cecilia Hoiblum, who's an expert in this field. Associate Professor Cecilia is the chair of reproductive endocrinology and infertility at the University of Sydney, where her role involves advancing teaching and research into infertility and reproductive endocrinology as part of the Reproduction and Perinatal Center at Sydney. She's also the scientific director of Westmead Fertility Centre, where she's spearheaded WFC into becoming Australia's leading IVF centres. She's got 27 years of experience in the field of assisted reproduction. She holds a PhD in early human embryonic development, and her award-winning research into cytokines and growth factors has actually translated into clinical practice through patented research. Welcome, Cecilia, and we are so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malhotra. It's really lovely to be with you today. Thank you.
It's awesome. Cecilia, we're talking about growing the best embryos today. And it's such a difficult question. I think we'll start with the first question for you. What actually really defines an embryo to be good? How do you define it? Is it morphology only, or is it genetics, or it's a combination of factors? Let's try and establish this fact first, and then we'll move ahead with how we can actually achieve our goals.
I guess the definition of a good embryo is one that will grow, develop, and then form an embryo that will go on to implant and create a healthy child in the end. That is the definition, really. And you and I know both that morphology, looking down the microscope, sometimes we can see beautiful things. They don't give us any children, and sometimes we can see things we wish we didn't see, and we're very surprised to learn that the patient has a baby from these. So there are a lot of things that we don't know, but all of us know that whatever we grow, if we nurture it, we set it on the right path. And that's important. And even genetics, we know from our genetics report that we get these embryos back, and sometimes they say they are aneuploid, but we still have children from that too. So I hope in the future maybe we can answer that question better, but I think nurturing is going to be crucial to have the end goal of a baby.
I really like that answer because now there are so many publications out there where even with like B grade embryos or C grade embryos, they're resulting in pregnancies, which especially junior embryologists or earlier on, we thought that these are not good embryos and we were actually thinking of discarding them. So does this mean that we should be cultivating embryos regardless of their grade? And then leaving it on the patient to decide what they want to do with the said embryo?
I think we have a little bit of a beauty competition. So I guess we know which one looks the best and might have the best potential. I think it's giving up on a patient that has really poor embryos. That's the bad thing, because I guess we tell our patients that you have a better chance of getting pregnant if we put it back in your uterus than if I put it in my bin. And we monitor poor embryo quality transfers in my clinic, and we do some of them. And every year they yield between 15 and 17 children. And these are embryos that are still cellular on day 5. So they're quite poor embryos. And still these patients have children. Of course, that was their number one. That was their best looking embryo.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't choose it for a patient who has like fantastic blastocysts, because if they don't get pregnant from the blastocysts that are beautiful, I doubt that they would be pregnant from a C grade. But I don't give up on a C grade if that's the only thing the patient has.
Yeah. So When you're saying that you have had like 17 children from patients who've had poor or suboptimal embryos, what do you do for such patients? Do you grow them till blastocyst? Do you still do day 3 transfers, maybe day 2 transfers? What is happening at your clinic?
I think we are realizing more and more that extended culture is more of a selection tool for us. If the patient only has 1 or 2 embryos and both of those or one of those is going back, we truly believe that the female reproductive tract is a much safer place for those embryos. There was a lot of chit chatter in the early 2000s that the uterus could be detrimental to a cleavage stage embryos. We know that through a few large studies now that is not quite the truth. And embryos day 2, day 3, they develop really well in the uterus if we let them. So I guess we use extended culture as a selection tool more. And if the patient has poor embryo development, we call the patient in early and say a day 3 transfer is probably better for you. So we're very holistic. We take decisions as we go, which is more labor intense for us, but I think we're rewarded in the long term and the patient.
Yeah, but this is quite different from a lot of laboratories all over the world where they want patients to grow their embryos till blastocyst and have an idea whether it's an embryonic cause for failure or whether it's something else that's happening within their body. They cancel transfers, um, especially for such patients who are poor responders, where if they are unable to grow blastocysts in the laboratories. I read a few case reports recently where there was a patient who had about 4 or 5 cycles where they could not grow till a blastocyst. In the next attempt, they transferred a day 2 embryo, and that resulted in a pregnancy. And these are instances that can happen. And does this tell us that maybe this could be a strategy for such patients?
Yes, I think we suffer dogma. I think blastocyst culture has become dogma instead of really having holistic approaches. We hear that, oh, you have to do blastocyst, otherwise you're not good. It's a little bit like ICSI. Oh, if you don't do ICSI, if you don't do assisted hatching, if you don't do PGTA, oh gosh, you'll never have a pregnancy. And it's dogma, it's fashion, it's
Fashion,
in
yeah.
vogue. It's not scientific reality. And I think that maybe we need to take a few step backs and tap into our own science and our own knowledge. And we know deep inside that biology is not dogma.
Yeah. I think in the previous conference, you spoke on IVF, and that was really eye-opening. I love that lecture. What do you feel here with respect to this topic where we're trying to grow the best embryos? Do you feel IVF is better or ICSI is better, or it's a select like it's different for different patients?
I think we should only use ICSI if we have to, and we only have to if the sperm sample is really poor. In my center, we do around 25% ICSI. I think that's probably what most clinics could be at. We know from China, 1 million cycles a year with 25% ICSI roughly. So we know that most patients do really well with IVF. And the large data sets are showing that IVF yields better pregnancy. So that's definitely for sure. But also our research now focuses on the first stage of embryo development, from the 2PN stage and the first cleavage rounds, because that's really where the embryo is set off on its path. A little bit like nurturing the seed in our garden. We need to really nurture those first steps so that we get healthy development, because we as embryologists have a lot to do with how this embryo grows. It's not just the patients and the PGTA report. It is really also about us and what we do and what decisions we take early on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message for all of the listeners for this podcast. Um, let's go into the laboratory now, Cecilia. For the audience here, what do you feel are some critical parameters that they must consider, which can influence embryo quality within the laboratory?
What a great question. And today of all, where I've been annoyed by something, I would probably answered this question differently last week. But do you know what? I think we all know about our QC. We all know about our QA. So I don't need to say that we need to have a clean laboratory. We need to measure temperature because we all don't do it and we do it really well. But do you know what many of us do really poorly? And that is aseptic techniques.
Okay.
I watch embryologists in so many labs around the world, and I am shocked and horrid by their approach to aseptic technique. When you make a dish, that is when the start happens. That's like preparing the ground for the seed. If you get that wrong, the patient won't get pregnant. It doesn't matter if she's young and fertile and everything is perfect. If the dish has the wrong osmolarity, if the dish has contaminants in it, we won't have anything. Things like people, if I go into my normal cell culture labs and suggest to them that we should turn off the hood, they would chase me out of the cell culture lab and say she's crazy now. Whereas you walk into so many IVF labs where the hood is off.
Yeah.
We'll have contamination if you don't use the aseptic technique and turn the hood off. So this week, that's my answer. It might have been different yesterday, but this week I really have a bee in my bonnet around dish making. We leave it for trainees and the juniors, but it really is an important job.
Yeah, and I think this is one task that's always dedicated to the junior most in the clinic. That is your job to start with making dishes, and then we'll try and progress you towards, let's say, ICSI being your end goal. And that's probably the wrong way to do things in our like profession.
Yes, or we can teach them well. We can be good teachers and we make sure that we teach them all right. So it's not, we don't arrive at their hood and it's a hurricane of dishes and lids and pipettes and everything. So as long as we teach, so I guess that's our main duty, isn't it? To teach. If we teach them well, then regardless of age, you will be able to make a good dish.
Because I feel that with the kind of training that most embryologists get nowadays, I think everyone can do ICSI, but not everyone can grow like good blastocysts consistently. I think performing consistently in a laboratory would probably be gold standard for most of us if we want to like have a name for us ourselves within our countries, within like our clinics, within the registries. Do you feel that there are things that embryologists should look for within themselves, within their skill sets, in order to achieve consistent goals?
I think we really need to look at controlling all variables. If we introduce an extra step, we are introducing variables in our system.
Yeah.
I think sitting down together, standardizing the way we work, even though it might be boring, shortcuts doesn't lead to consistency. It's only an agreed path that is straight that will lead to consistency. And if we cut as many steps as we can in that, because then we reduce variables, and then we make sure that we have processes in place that standardizes that. And then in the end, by cutting variables, the patient is the only variable. And I think really the more we can reduce variables that are within our control, the more consistent our results will be.
What I'm understanding from this answer is that we need to have detailed SOPs for each and every procedure and follow it to the T so that we don't deviate from good practices. And ultimately, like for each and every patient, we are performing the same procedure in the same manner. Therefore, it's only the patient that can influence the outcome.
100%, 100%. I think that's very true, very true. And not cheat. Not cheat because you're by yourself in the lab and it's a Saturday afternoon and no one's watching me. That's the trick is to do it when no one's watching. Like when no one's watching, you're going to be the same high standards as you are when everyone's watching.
Yeah, that's what I actually read about this very recently. I was doing a journal club, and there's a specific effect known as the Hawthorne effect. where if you're being monitored, and this is especially for randomized controlled trials where everything's being documented, you perform at your best. And that's why even in the control groups, you might get like better outcomes as expected. And this was published very recently when Professor Gardner published the study on AI, and then
Mm-hmm.
their control group had the expected pregnancy rate was about 36, and they got 48% clinical pregnancy rate in the control group, and thus could not show a difference between AI and morphological selection. Mm. Sounded cool.
Well,
Okay.
it's great to know that us embryologists still have a place. I'm sure that AI will come hand in hand with us, but it will only hold our hand. I don't think it will take over.
I absolutely agree with that statement. While we're talking about AI, do you feel that there are certain technological advancements that are coming into clinics now that might help us achieve better culture conditions for our embryos, better selection for our embryos, and ultimately better outcomes?
Mm. I think when it comes to selection, we're quite good at that. And maybe down the line, I could ask for that when I have everything else. But what I really want to see AI helping us with
Yeah,
is the QA and the QC and the KPIs. Charles Borman in the US has published some really interesting work where they've used AI to try to get like early KPIs, early indicators of their culture system going well, and even operators. They looked at ICSI and embryo transfer operators, where they can see very early on if things are good or bad. Imagine if we could walk into the lab in the morning and our AI system is having a green light telling us today everything is fabulous. And it's
yeah.
so that would be more fantastic than picking a
Yeah,
blast,
I love that. Yeah.
which I'm quite good at, but and I guess which the published results tells us that embryologists are good at. But these boring things, and I think there is so much to learn in the QC, in the QA, all the data that we churn out. Give AI a go at that. I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that. And even in witnessing that you talked about before, there are things now that monitor eye movements and hand movements. If we had those type of controls in our hoods in the future,
Yeah.
if we had AI markers identifying cells
Yeah.
instead of writing on dishes, they are the things that I want. And then I could do my ICSIs myself.
It's very interesting because, like, I read a paper on witnessing again recently where they saw that when embryologists were working beyond 4 p.m. In the laboratories, that's when most of the errors were creeping into the system. So, I mean, it's not just about double witnessing what is happening in the laboratory. It's giving us data about how embryologists are performing, when are they doing well, when are they getting burnt out, all of those things as well. And I mean, it's something that I would love to look into.
And imagine if AI can support us in that.
Absolutely. But what about like improving culture conditions? Like there's this huge debate on time lapse
Mm.
where they feel that if the culture system is what we currently follow, if it's an interrupted system where we're taking the dish out and observing it multiple times, we're probably compromising growth, and time lapse helps us overcome that. What's your take on that?
I think that we don't have any controlled randomized trials that's managed to prove this. And what we actually have is the study that was published in July, I believe, in Lancet, where they had compared the time lapse with the uninterrupted culture and then had just any incubator. Those three groups, it's a very powerful study, and it actually showed no difference between the three.
Yeah,
I think we always have to think about what we do. I think good embryologists will, and of course, in an uninterrupted culture is something that I do believe in. We don't need to bring dishes out every day. So I think there's a balance there, but I don't think we all need to rush out and buy a time-lapse incubator. But I have them because they're super, super useful. Again, in supporting me in difficult decision making, in supporting me if I want to do an ICSI at 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't need to come in at 9 o'clock at night to check fertilization because I just
yeah,
look at my time lapse. It is a great tool. Again, they are things that are there to support us, and it's really nice to have those abilities in the lab. Are they the be all end all? No, not evident right now, but what the future will hold, I can't tell you.
All right. I think we're nearing the end of this podcast, Cecilia. I'll have quick two questions for you now. You spoke about KPIs. What's the most important KPI that one should follow in the laboratory?
Oh,
What's your
I
fa-
think
What's your
I think
favorite?
what's my favorite would probably be good embryo development day 3
Okay.
and blastocyst development day 5. They are the strongest of my KPIs,
Yeah.
I would say. Of course, the clinical pregnancies is always, really strong, but at the end of the day, they happen a long time after something goes wrong in the lab. So if I would look at indicators of now, it will be those things for sure.
I really like following up with my implantation rates
Mm.
because I mean, I think it's telling me, firstly, obviously, the embryo is of good quality, but secondly, it's also telling me whether my selection is good or not, especially single embryo transfers. Then it's also telling me a little bit about the endometrium. It probably tells me about everything that's happening within the laboratory, and I really like to follow up with the implantation rates.
Yeah,
in-
absolutely. The only unfortunate thing is that it's 7 weeks away. So once you find out, you have had that problem for 7
yeah,
weeks. But I guess, but again, in the future, we will have better tools for this.
Okay. Last question. What's one piece of advice that you would want to give to embryologists who are either coming in new or who are aiming to like improve on their practices, and have already been working for some time now?
Ooh. Never lose the passion. Never lose sight that there is a human being behind the embryos and the sperms and the eggs. Never lose sight that the baby is the biggest goal, not going home. Or I think that's really important. And then read, listen, find information, make sure that where you work supports you to go to conferences, take part in workshops, really forward your own knowledge. And that's absolutely the best recipe. You and I both, we have our hobby as our job. You never go to work when you have your hobby as your job.
It's true. I think that's fantastic, and I think we're fortunate in this profession that most of us are like this. Like we would treat our job as our hobby, and we would be very happy spending hours and hours in the lab or in the clinic, and we're not looking for validation, not looking for monetary gains, but working towards helping patients achieve their dreams, and somehow that brings us so much happiness that it's more than enough for us.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I think it's been fantastic having this chat with you, Cecilia. And we're looking forward to more conversations like these in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a delightful few minutes in this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.